So unlike the last campaign when we were in Auckland with really protective waters, here in Barcelona we have the open Mediterranean just a couple hundred meters away from where we're sitting here. So we have a lot of water that's exposed, or a lot of shoreline that's exposed to open ocean currents and open ocean winds that can drive a pretty hefty sea state here. We are not privy to butterflat water 100% of the time, and the sea state here can range from those offshore breezes, which give us flat conditions, to some sea states that are over 1 meter to 1.5 meters high.
That has on the sailing?
Yeah, the water here in Barcelona is pretty dynamic. We have a lot of changes that happen here. There's quite a bit of sea state that can come up. We have waves, and they're not always just driven by the wind here locally. The Mediterranean's an interesting body of water where it's relatively large, but it's also enclosed. So we don't get big ocean rolling swells like you would in California or on the Atlantic Ocean. But what we do get sometimes is waves and sea state that doesn't seem like it should fit to what we have in terms of our wind here locally. So it's quite interesting how a really windy day in France and will determine the waves that we have here in Spain on a light air day. So it makes it pretty interesting.
Every day for us, we start with a briefing from our team meteorologist, who gives us an understanding of what our expectations can be for the weather conditions for that particular day. We use a variety of weather models to help us understand the range of conditions that we can expect, some of which are just predicting the wind or rain, but others that predict the current that we can expect and the sea state that's predicted for where we intend to sail. Well, the ideal sea state for these types of boats would be super flat water. If we could have really flat water and really big breeze, we'd be loving every day here. However, that's not always the case. The sea state for us is a limiting factor once it gets over about 1.5 meters high. And the breeze for us, we have wind limits for the event that we're not going to be racing in conditions below 6.5 knots of breeze or above 21 knots of breeze.
So we have, by looking at what's happening around the Mediterranean and the weather patterns, we can pretty accurately predict what the waves will be, the sea state and the currents here in Barcelona. So that helps us choose which days we're going to go out and how we're going to configure the boat to go racing on those days. The ideal sea state for these foiling boats is perfectly flat water like you'd have on your bathtub in your house. But that's pretty much impossible to have in a place like here in Barcelona. So we just try and get as flat a water as possible, but we don't always get to choose. Since we have to go sailing when it's a race day and the race committee says we need to go racing, we have to go out and manage in whatever conditions are out there.
For me, the America's Cup has always been the coolest sailing event on the planet. I mean, you're pushing the technology as far as you possibly can. I often tell my wife and children that it's like I'm working for NASA, but on the water, because every day we're trying to figure out how to literally make boats fly. I don't think you can get much cooler than that.
I think the cool factor of American Magic and the America's Cup in general is how it's a sport that really brings together so many different factors. It's such a complex game. There's so much that happens with design and engineering, but it's also athleticism and sport and quick decision making, organization. There's so much that happens under this roof, and then there's also the whole weather factor that gets brought into it. You know, a basketball team that plays in the stadium doesn't have to worry about the waves and the sea state and the wind and the rain, but we have to deal with all those things. So there's so much that happens in this sport and in this game of the America's Cup in general that we really, that's the real cool factor of this endeavor of trying to win the America's Cup. And then having a U.S. boat in this competition is obviously, it's extremely important, it's exciting, it's something that we really love, the fact that we're representing our country and our nation. And America, the U.S., has a huge history in the sport of America's Cup racing. So to be able to come here and try and win it back to America would be a really fantastic goal.